Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is ILEANA, founder of Phoenix on the Rise, a women's company that teaches women how to connect to their higher selves and lead empowered and rich lives through that connection. My company also creates connections between women online. One of the ways that I do that is by interviewing really interesting and courageous women. So today we have another woman that we're going to interview. And I've had the pleasure of recently getting to know Deborah Marshall-Warren. I'll give you a little bit of her background. She is the author of 3 published books, an enthusiastic traveler, and the conduit for Whole Being Hypnotherapy. She has her own private practice for over 27 years and is a visiting consultant and trainer in international hospitality and wellness resorts in Southeast Asia for several years. In 2011, Deborah gave a highly regarded talk as part of the TEDx series in Malta titled The Wizard of Us, which I've watched and is very, very interesting. I found it fascinating, actually. So I've been getting to know Deborah and have found her to be a lovely human being and a light shining very brightly in the world. So I'm very thrilled to have her here. The theme for today's video is around angelic guidance. So we'll also speak to Deborah about her work, how she's helped people in many different ways, and well, as the testimonials on her website show. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Ilana. Such a shining introduction. I'm really touched. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure having you here. So we're going to start a little bit with your background, and then we're going to move forward and see how things have evolved for you, because the angelic guidance is such a big, strong theme in your life. This is what I want to work with. So let me ask you my first question. You were born and bred in Northern England. Now, did you at any time during your formative years ever suspect you'd become a world traveling hypnotherapist?
The truth is, no. I was very guided into my work as a hypnotherapist, and I was probably growing up in the north of England. I was a really old-fashioned kid. I truly was. In fact, my knowledge of the world was my geography classes, my history lessons at school, and my father collected stamps. My father had a vast collection of postage stamps, and I loved participating when my father was arranging his stamps. He was exceedingly meticulous, and his father had been a traveler in India. His brother was a traveler, and in Africa for a long number of years. His father too, for a number of years. So my knowledge of the world was these exotic and colorful and aging stamps. And I was also a great writer of letters. I had 2 pen friends, one in Malaysia and one in Sweden.
Now, how did you meet these people?
Well, in those days, we were encouraged to write letters. I'm still a great correspondent. Maybe it's postcards these days, but if you had sent me a letter, Ilana, I would be able to locate it. I have kept every letter that was ever sent from me.
Wow.
And and some of them go back to 1 year of age. And even maybe just as I was born, because I have letters that congratulated my parents that my father kept when I was born.
That's an amazing collection. What a lineage, right?
Pardon me?
What a lineage you have.
Well, I feel I treasure handwriting, and the art of handwriting is a mirror of the psyche. And one of the reasons I feel that I do not understand why schools are letting go of the art of handwriting is because an interpreter of handwriting, a graphologist, would in fact be able to read the psyche from the beauty and the curvaceousness and the loops or the spidery, tight writing of any correspondent.
Yes, that's very true. I love that art. That is such a fascinating art, right? And it's interesting how your writing changes over time.
Yes, and how we were taught to write, and how we were all taught to write in a way with the same style.
Yes,
But
yes,
then our personality naturally and subtly imbued our writing style. Um, and so it took on a flourish. It took on the flourishes of our nature,
yes,
of
yes.
aspects of our psyche and our personalities. So writing is luminous in a way and revealing and is a mirror of our psyches.
So it's
And
interesting how, yeah, kids are not learning that skill anymore. So that's an avenue that's going to be closed to so many of them for self-discovery because they're not learning cursive writing anymore.
very much so. And this
Fascinating.
is a great loss. And so I would probably even today pick up a letter and without looking at the signatory, I would know which friend sent me that letter. I it it really, for me, these are treasures, and who really is going to keep emails in the future?
Yes, no, very true, very true. And they're so impersonal. So your father had this amazing stamp collection and you started to dream about travel. And then at the age of 21, you did something about that. Tell me.
Well, I even before that, my first traveling experience was some very. I did go to Sweden to visit my pen friend, and I did ultimately arrive in Malaysia later in years to meet Pamela. But I met at the age of 18, 19, some very creative and curiously minded friends, and they were delightfully wacky and adventurous and ponderous and articulate, and and we set off together interrailing, and that was my first experience of traveling. I was enthralled, and I was so appreciative. I got my A-level results in Rome. I waited for them at the post restaurant, and my mother and father, of course, sent them on to me. So these were real days of patience
Yes.
and 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 with the patience and kind of more due diligence and acceptance that things took time.
Yes.
So I grew up accepting that it took a while to save for things. It took a while for one to anticipate owning something or having something. Though, and even today, of course, results would have been texted, but all of us went to the post restaurant and picked up our letters. And for
So this
me, I picked my level results.
this was not the age of instant gratification, that's for sure.
Absolutely not. Which it was, and there was a sense of excitement.
Yes. The
Yeah,
anticipation.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And then you took a big leap. This was your first courageous step that you really took because traveling to other destinations is the beginning of the journey. But now you went and you spent 6 months in another country, in another culture, really immersed. So tell us about that.
I did, Ilana, and I guess I probably saw a small newspaper cutting for kibbutzim in Israel that was seeking volunteers, and they were seeking not just Jewish volunteers but non-Jewish volunteers, and this attracted me probably because I was going to join a community. I was going to be participating in something where my contribution would be valued, um, and I would be integrated in what seemed relatively safe in a way. Although you say it was a big adventure, I was not going to arrive and be alone. So,
Of course.
but At this time, the only flights to Israel were Eilat, Air Eilat, and so there was an interview process. They did wish to check that you were in integrity with your reasons for going, your decisions for your decision to go.
El Al. So you flew with El Al, the Israeli airline, right?
That's El Al. Yes, yes. I think at the time they were the only airline that flew there, and one arrived one arrived into Israel, to Tel Aviv, with no sense of where one was going. So you were literally given the name of your kibbutz when you got there, and I was sent south. I took a bus. I took a bus to a town called Ashkelon, and Ashkelon is a seaside resort on the border between Israel and Gaza. It was an emerging kibbutzim. There were around 100 adults, maybe 40 children, and 50 volunteers. So it really was, they really did give me an opportunity to enter a kibbutz that was, it had emerged. It wasn't an embryonic kibbutz, but it was still a small kibbutz. And in those days, kibbutzim was still growing.
And it was an international group you were with, right?
Very much so. I was with people from the UK, but I was with volunteers from the Netherlands, from America, Canada. They were all over Europe, and German. I remember there were 2 German volunteers, and in actual fact, in those days, that was quite an enigma, you know. So there was a mutual education and understanding. There was an openness and embracing ness, and also this sense of common community. That
so you were involved in building something together.
Yes, and you were always required to be present. And to really give the present of your presence. I remember one occasion, a volunteer was walking around with earphones and a Walkman in the refectory, and one of the kibbutzniks asked them to remove the Walkman, because they were absenting themselves from the community. Almost they were disconnected from the task. And again, today, people would not necessarily be pulled up like that.
Yes, very true, very true. I think that whole environment was very different.
It truly was respectful. And at that time, I need to say that there was an incredible sense of positivity in Israel. There was Begin and Sadat formed during those years the Camp David Peace Accord.
Yes.
So there was significant optimism for relations between Egypt and Israel, and there was optimism within the kibbutzim society. Thank you.
Now tell me what happened when you went to the beach one day. When you went to the beach.
Oh, yes. Okay. So we had the opportunity to go to Gaza on a Saturday, and or of course we could go to the beach. And I was with a small group of volunteers. I'm not a strong swimmer, and so I would be someone who was still cautious of the sea. But I got into the sea and I was jumping over the waves. I was just probably my inner child was out there having fun, and in what, of course, coming from the UK, was astonishingly consistent sunshine. And at some point, and probably not many minutes into this playful sense of exploration, I realized that I was further out than I would have considered myself to be. And at this juncture when my consciousness absorbed this reality, the waves had got more and more majestic, more and more powerful. And of course, I made to swim back to the shore immediately. And what I found myself was, as I was swimming towards the shore, the waves were taking me further out.
So the current had changed and you were being pulled out to sea.
I was being pulled further and further out, and the volunteers on the shoreline were a distant vision before me. And I had never encountered or been told about the undertow, and the concept of undertow. And I was in the sea, ILEANA, realizing the waves were pushing me under and under. I'd swallowed so much water. And the bizarre, of course, I looked around me. Of course, I was, as I resurfaced, I would scan the sea around me, but there was no one there. And there was no notion of shouting help because there was no one to hear me, and the waves were louder than my voice.
Right. So you must have been very frightened at this point.
I'd gone through this terror, but having swallowed so much water, whether the exhaustion satiated my fear, I bizarrely and weirdly came to a state of peace. It was, to this day, I find it a little odd, but that may be how it is for people, that I accepted this was it. I accepted I was going. The sea was going to take me. But at this moment, from nowhere and everywhere, a voice said to me, I'm going to get you out. Put your arms around my neck.
So someone suddenly appeared, like this young man suddenly appeared.
Just simply and absolutely in a heartbeat appeared. As though they came from another realm and manifested in human form.
So this was your first angelic experience?
Yes.
And he pulled you to shore and he saved your life?
And he got me to the shore. He dropped me on the shore. I was embraced and surrounded by the other volunteers, and I was vomiting, of course, the seawater that I'd copious amounts that I'd swallowed. And I looked up and I saw, as I was about to utter some notion of gratitude to this incredible man who'd had the bravery to come out and get me, I simply saw a figure of a slender man walking down the beach.
And he just walked away and you never saw him again?
I never saw him again.
Wow, that's very powerful.
And I always realized my life was not meant to end. I must have something ahead of me, a path that deserved me alive.
Beautiful. So that was your first encounter. Now let's fast forward a few years. I was really interested when you said you got involved with the Tony Robbins programs.
Yes.
So this is like episode 2. So tell us about the movie and also the Tony Robbins and what happens with that.
I guess we talked about a movie that I really fell in love with called Wings of Desire. It was made in 1987 by a German director, Wim Wenders, and the Berlin Wall was still in place. The Berlin Wall came down in 89. And the movie essentially was about angels who lived in libraries. Peace, of course. So libraries were a metaphor for kind of heaven on earth, and they were visible to young children, tiny children, and seniors who were about to pass. And the part of the movie that I found so encouraging and so enlightening and so believable was how the angel would sit next to a human on the underground in Berlin. So they could traverse the wall. They could just fly through.
Of course.
But they would sit next to an individual on the metro, and this person, let's say in East Germany at the time, or in the West, but their thoughts, with internal thoughts, could be in dissension. For example, a man had lost his job. His thoughts are, I won't be able to feed my children, my wife may leave me, my world will fall apart. And the angel would simply sit next to this being on the metro and gradually and silently support this person in helping their thoughts ascend. Such, the man would begin to think, well, I may get another job.
Yeah.
Something else may come along. And so gradually the thoughts ascended from complete impossibility into possibility.
Wow, what an amazing gift. So this reminds me of a TV series. I think I mentioned it to you. That was popular in North America, I think about 20 years ago, and it was called Touched by an Angel. And
you did?
Right? It was the same idea. Like, it was these angels that come on earth to help people who are really struggling, and they show up in their lives. And it's the same thing. Encouragement, God loves you, you're not forgotten. And they help them shift everything around, and then they're gone. So very similar. And I think the movie you mentioned was remade years later into the movie called City of Angels, right?
Yes, it was, with Meg Ryan.
That's
yes.
right. That's right. Very cool. So then tell me Tony Robbins and how all this relates together. It's such a beautiful story.
Well, I initially I did Robbins' program in London, which was held at Crystal Palace, and at Crystal Palace, you know, he's a great salesperson, big marketeer, but I also really found his teaching life enhancing, and I really felt he was a conduit. He was conduit for language, that he was connected to something higher.
Yes.
I liked aspects of him, and I loved the firewalk. So you're probably aware that we did a firewalk, and
yes,
I felt very nurtured by this program. And on the third day, we had the opportunity to sign up for what was an incredibly expensive 3-part program, all in America. And like many, I was not alone at all. We put this on our credit cards. And this was going to be over the next 3 years. So you do one annually, perhaps. It wasn't the
right.
one was going.
That was a big commitment. First of all, a very big commitment. And it was the beginning of a really big shift inside of you, right?
And faith, a great sense of faith and trust. As I said, there's 3 parts, but the part that was, and I still would recommend this program, it's called Date with Destiny.
Date with Destiny.
At the time I did it in Palm Springs, it was maybe attended by 500 people. I realized today he works with much greater numbers. And there was one particular day on this program where I came into this hotel room, and one of our group, the family that I was connected with, sat me on the front row. And I thought, I said this to you, I'm not someone who kind of heads for the front row. I'm not, I'm not kind of necessarily pushy in that sense, but yeah. I knew the fact that I was sitting on the front row, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going to happen today. Several things happened, and I and one thing that happened was that Tony was talking about his values. He was talking about how his values had run amok. Health was at the bottom of his list,
Yeah.
financial, the money was at the top, and family was falling down, and so it really was a discussion about how at one point in his trajectory he made $1 million, lost $1 million, and but he asked, can anyone read what was happening in my life at this time? And a voice inside of me must have said, me. I mean, it was the most astonishing thing, Ilana, because it was as though something larger than me stepped up to speak. And I was handed the microphone, and it was my first experience of being a conduit myself, but being a conduit for healing vocabulary, I think is how I would describe it.
Right.
That the words that had been manifested in Wings of Desire was suddenly were emerging within me, and this and 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 Tony, a man of voluble sound, was suddenly utterly silent,
Wow.
and he said,
You silenced Tony Robbins.
what's your name? What's your name, miss? And I said, Deborah. And he said, your sun is going to begin to shine.
Your sun is going to begin to shine. Lovely.
Arising, like
Yes, yes.
the sunrise. And people said afterwards to me, because I mean, I'm really quite a shy person. They said afterwards, my gosh, the poetry was coming through you. What happened, And I really didn't know at that time. And the day cantered on, and this was the last day of the seminar. It was 5 days, I think, 5, 6, and uh, we were doing an exercise which we're all familiar with. It was an exercise about self-love and actually being able to say something wonderful about yourself. And in spite of what had happened earlier, I'd gone back to Deborah, Deborah had stepped up. And I was very shy about doing this. And growing up in the North, I assure you, you did not.
I'm sure.
Being as precocious to say you did well at something. It was a very different world. And the seminar came to a close for the evening, and my buddy, who was quite close to Tony, she went off for dinner with him. It was just a little unfortunate, not her dinner, but I was going to be alone. But clearly it was meant to be.
Yes.
And the head trainer rushed over to me and said, Deborah, we're so sorry about this, but she needs to spend some time with him. Her husband was a casting agent, and Tony was interested in going into the movies, theaters, which I believe he did. And I went down to a local hotel. I think I had a glass of wine, and I'd had another epiphany that particular morning. I mean, there was lots of epiphanies on these programs.
Well, it was obviously very transformational.
Very transformational. You were almost constantly cascading with revelations, one after another. And I was writing in my journal, but there was this sense of being aware that, my gosh, this is a sick day, and I am still not loving myself. I'm still, low self-worth, low self-esteem, and also another reason I was there was to find my path. I was aware that even though it hadn't come to an end, my work in London was, I could intuit it was in transition. And Palm Springs is surrounded by mountains, and only the First Nation people were able to descend down to the Palm Springs. It's so rugged. I mean, even the cable car takes 12 minutes to ascend to the top of this mountain. And in my mind, I'm sitting by the pool, writing, almost automatically writing down my thoughts. But in my mind, I railed at God, and I said, this is the last day of this seminar. I spent all this money on this seminar, and I still don't know what my path is and what I'm going to do. And I asked God for help. And it was a very strong and emotive cry for help.
Right. So it came from deep inside your heart.
Very much so, ILEANA. And at that time, I was in no way in my power. I was successful in my work, but I was not a sovereign being as I am.
And you were not on the path yet. You were getting there, but you were not there yet.
Absolutely. I was not there.
And then something happened.
And I was on my way. And I carried on writing, and someone walked over to me. He was a guy. He said hello.
Somebody you didn't know?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was the only person by the pool, because of course everyone else was working in a two, and with their buddy, and this hotel was kind of across the road, and I said hi, and this guy said to me, "You asked God for help. What help do you want?" And I said,
wow.
But did you ask God for help? I said, yes, but I did, but how did you know? And he said, well, it's like a form of telepathy. I didn't know whether it was a guy or a woman. I was simply told someone sitting by the swimming pool asked God for help.
And what did he say to you then?
And he said to me, ILEANA, your wings are going to grow and your clothes will no longer fit you.
Your wings are going to grow and your clothes will no longer fit you. Then he walked away.
Incredible. Well, then he said to me, I'm in a state of immediate heightened awareness, of course. But I felt, he's standing next to me, and I felt this serenity, this utter peace that passeth all understanding flow through my whole being. And there was, as though I became a blank canvas. There was a cleansing, there was a healing through
a release, big release.
And of course I said, my goodness, thank you, but I was also, of course, there was this collision of thoughts of, my goodness, this is the angel in wings of desire. I was immediately aware that there were angels on earth.
So, wow, this was your second angelic encounter. Very, very much flesh and blood, which is not what we ever expect, right? So sometimes they do show up that way. I think that's absolutely true. Often they're not corporeal, but I think often the guidance is in person. And then shortly after, you met the woman that you decided to study hypnotherapy with.
Indeed. And when I returned to the UK, there was kind of a meetup. It wasn't called meetup then, but it was a gathering of people, not only people who'd come back from Palm Springs, but people who had participated in Unleash the Power Within, which was the 3-day personal power
Yeah.
experience at TEDx.
Yeah.
And Valerie most certainly was there
Selling her stuff.
selling her course. But what was incredible for me was as Valerie Austin, as Valerie stood in front of me, I experienced pins and needles from the top of my head to the tips of my fingers and toes. I wasn't going anywhere.
So you were like, this is it, this is it, this is it.
It was a intense experience within my whole body. And so, of course, I spoke with her. And Valerie to this day will say I had such success in our course. It was as though I met the person whom I was called to train with and to step into my calling. And I was at that time working with BBC Worldwide. They made documentaries, and I was creating a training program for them. And I took my paycheck from that freelance gig and gave it to Valerie. So, and I realized that following that training, because of course I wasn't, although I'd done the training, you become a great driver by driving. So yeah. I practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced. And I took a small room in Regent Street. I completely leapt. I realized today that years later, I would listen to people say they've been made redundant and say they've been given 30,000, and then they decide to train as a Reiki practitioner or a nutritionist, so something that is their heart desire. But I didn't have that.
Right.
And I would sit in a small church in just behind Regent Street every lunchtime and meditate and continue to ask God for help. And I know the most astonishing things happened with my clients.
First you graduated top of her class, right?
And that was astonishing for me because it was amazing when Valerie told me that, because I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I loved how it embraced vocabularies. I've always loved words. I was always intrigued by Roger's thesaurus and how you could describe light in 20 or 30 different words and phrases. So
and then of course the clients came along, and I mean 27 years later, like you're obviously you have a full practice. So let's talk a little bit about how you can help clients, specific issues. I know you work with people who want to do weight loss management. Is that correct?
I work with women and men who wish to lose weight, because what I would always say, and I don't wish to generalize because my work doesn't make assumptions, but often there can be an emotional weight sometimes, which a person can be holding on to an emotional weight. And when they heal and reconcile the emotional weight, the physical weight can leave the body.
Right.
But it could be depression, it could be grief, it could be confidence building, self-esteem building, it could be
sleep issues, right? Phobia, sleep issues, all those kinds of things.
Really, without sounding glib, ILEANA, if you can think of it, you can use hypnotherapy for it. And also enhancement, public speaking. I've worked with actors or auditions or opera singers. Opera singers, even when they're at the top of their game, they can suddenly have stage fright.
Yes, yes.
From nowhere. Stage fright can suddenly bite, and they have to go back, and they don't know if they can. I mean, it's fascinating that even during this current time with the Olympic Games,
Yes.
mental issues have been coming up where this sense of overwhelm, because as an Olympian, you cannot afford a whisper of fear.
Yes, and you train for this your whole life, so it's extremely crucial to the rest of it. So now, do you work with people remotely also, or do you need to be there in person with them?
I work together with people in Malta and London when I'm there, and of course I've worked in person at the wellness resorts that you spoke of earlier. More recently, because of the debacle that we've all been involved in, more people have asked to work online, and that has surprised me, because as we're having this conversation today, as though there was a table between us and we're in the same room, it has become like that. And perhaps it's also fair to say that I would always say I'm still, I'm still training 27 years later. I'm still humbled by the outcomes of this work, and I would still say that I'm a conduit and I receive help. I would always say that I do not feel I work alone.
And you do work remotely, yes? So you can work like this?
So I do work remotely.
Perfect.
But I would still always say, when it's possible, it's great to work
Of
in
course.
person.
I think any of this healing modalities, even the work that I do, is much better done in person. But this actually allows a broader audience access to you. So if people want to get a hold of you, I'm going to post online where they can reach you, and they can get some help. And not just that, but you're just such a lovely person. Thank you so much for this. It's been wonderful chatting with you and hearing your story. All the best, and we'll see you again very soon. Take care, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Ilana.
Thank you.
And thank you for having the inspiration to consider me and invite me. And I was really touched, very touched.
My
thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.